We are recording now.
So we talked about when you lift stuff, you want to lift like closer to the fulcrum. So you don't want to like lift with your arms straight out. You want to bend your arms.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be in closer to where the kind of center of your mass is, but then also that fulcrum, obviously, I mean, if you're making that fulcrum now your shoulder, you can see that, make that fulcrum my shoulder, now anything I'm lifting out here is going to put a lot more force on the muscles. It's going to require a lot more energy to maintain any sort of position of the muscles there. And yeah, all right, give me 1 second here. I'm switching audio. Zoomies, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. What else did we learn?
We learned that the recommended weight limit is equal to a bunch of different stuff. It's like there's the load constant, horizontal multiplier, vertical multiplier, distance multiplier, asymmetric multiplier. So you have all of these things that kind of contribute to reducing the weight that one could lift.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And so you even have things like the coupling multipliers. So how good of a grip can you get on the system itself? Right. And so every additional thing reduces that recommended weight limit. And what is that recommended weight limit for? I mean, what is it helping prevent?
Lower back injury.
Exactly. Yes, lower back injury. Yeah, and we talked about last time, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's something like a third of all workers' comp claims are due to lower back pain, something like $60 billion a year in the US alone paid out in workers' comp claims or missed productivity, et cetera. Cool. Any questions about what we learned last time? Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. So a handful of y'all have already done the extra credit assignment that we talked about last time. And I looked at, I think, noon, and this was everybody who had done so at noon. I'm going to pull up the different list here. And so if you are on the call, I don't think anybody in here had did it, but just quickly give us an overview of your drawing. So Hannah, you want to quickly give us an overview of what your drawing was?
Yeah, so basically I had the idea that some kind of elevator could lift the groceries up to the cashier so that they wouldn't have to like bend over or anything, and that they could like go back down and the customer could pick them up with like, I guess, closer to their center of body mass like we were mentioning. But this part might not be a good idea because probably the customer shouldn't have to bend down either.
Yeah, and so I think you'll see a combination. I think it was Denny's idea of having the cart open up, and you'll see that in a second. But it could be some cool hybrid there. Awesome. I love it. Avery, are you on the call?
Yeah.
You want to go over what you drew?
So mine is based pretty much off of like targets because it's already a pretty good setup. I just raised up the I don't know, the cash wrap up some and then placed the bags up higher so that you don't have to bend over and reach for them as you're bagging. And then everything, like the screen's at eye level, and so is the card payment. So there's not as much strain to look up or to adjust to it.
Awesome. And I love that you kind of established that best work zone right in there. And the label's pretty good. I don't know if anybody can see that, but hipster employee with an attitude, I think, is a fairly accurate assumption for most of these, it seems. Nice. Good job. Emily Cullars, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect.
Can
you want to give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So mine starts out with like the front of the buggy opening so that you can slide your stuff onto the belt, and then the belt takes it up onto like that like height area of the cashier, and it goes through like an automatic scanner, and then it gets bagged and then slides right back into another buggy. Kind of the same idea of like, Aldi, how you have to like rent a buggy, but you take stuff out of your buggy and they put it into another buggy. And
Mm-hmm.
then the buggies would be slightly higher so that when you get out to your car, you can again open the front of the buggy and slide it into your trunk without having to lift it.
I love it. You're completely designing out the person too. You've got this automatic bagger. That's awesome. I mean, it's not awesome that people are going to be out of jobs, but I like the idea. And you get extra credit points for designing me a logo. So we're good on that one.
Good deal.
All right, Sheri, you want to give us an overview?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to eliminate the whole process of putting your groceries on there, because we already have a couple of stores that allow you to order your groceries and things like that. So I just thought it would be nice if you could walk into the store, walk up to either, I didn't draw all of this, but like a kiosk if you needed to, or go up to a person if you needed some help. And then the idea is you order all of your things, and then they kind of give you a cue or an alert and tell you, hey, your stuff is ready, come get it. And then basically they could have it all in the cart for you, because I feel like a cart or a flat, cart would be pretty typical. So then if you still needed help, you could have somebody come out there and assist you. But then that way you're not going around shopping, you're not going around trying to like pick things up. They actually just do it for you. And then basically in the back of I would just imagine the whole store being, or all the items, in the back in a warehouse, and then they could have them all at an easy level for all of them to get it and bring it to you.
I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah, my parents have definitely, I don't want to say abused, but overused this whole order online at the grocery store and have it just put straight into their trunk so they don't have to worry about that whatsoever. But back when I was living in Virginia, we had a grocery store there. I don't remember what chain it was, where you could, when you went in, you would just rent a little a scanner itself. And so you would scan things as you put them into your buggy, into your bags. And so there was no checkout person. You just would take that back. You would pay when you put the scanner thing back there. And it would reduce the amount of lifting and bending over for everybody involved. But it also got rid of some of the checkout folks. Good. And then lastly, Denny.
So along with that theme of the front of the cart opening, that would have a latch, and then you could open that up. I also put in each one is convertible. So you have the cart is convertible with pushing the front down, and then you also have on each side of the I guess that belt, the lane, you can push those down so that the larger items that are on the bottom, it doesn't prevent back injury in the actual store, but at least you can push it up and get your dog food or paper towels or the bulky items up to the belt. And then that could actually get lowered down and everything pushed through back onto the cart. So very similar to some of the other designs.
I love it. And you must have the steadiest hand ever. These are some very straight lines.
Oh, I got help. It's the iPad with the Procreate. You put on the guided assist. Yeah. I cheat, man.
Smart man. Awesome. Yeah, these are all great. If anybody posted that I didn't include, I'm sorry I missed it, but I didn't see it as of midday today. But good job with these. For those of y'all who haven't done it, feel free to put that in the discussion section to get some extra credit points. All right, here's your fun fact of the day. Movie trailers were originally shown after the feature film, is why they're referred to as trailers. There you go. All right, so we're building off of what we talked about on Tuesday with the musculoskeletal system. Today we're going to primarily be talking about the muscles and fatigue. But as we teased on Tuesday, the primary function of the muscles is that contraction to generate the force and thus produce movement. This is why I always find Halloween time stupid, because you have skeletons moving around without any forces that are acting on them. Now, I guess that's part of the scary part, but whatever. Who gives a crap? And so we have three different muscle groups, muscle subgroups, classifiers. Smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and skeletal muscles. So smooth muscles, what are found in the stomach and intestines, blood vessels, urinary bladder, uterus, etc. Right, these are normally things that are not usually under conscious control. Right, digestion takes place without you having to think about it. And in fact, I'm not sure you could ever get to a point where your mind-gut connection was such that you could affect your digestion, at least directly. And then cardiac muscles, so the muscles of the heart. So what is responsible for the contraction, for the beating of your heart? Also similarly, not common to have conscious control over them. And when I say conscious control, I mean the direct control, right? Obviously, we can all get our heart rates up by breathing heavily or working out, right? That would be a conscious control, but that would be kind of a secondary control of those muscles rather than a primary control. You know, I can contract my bicep directly. I don't have to do something primarily to affect that secondary change. Here's a fun fact that I'm thinking about that's not entirely related to this, but about, I think, a half to 2/3 of your body's serotonin. So serotonin, for those who aren't familiar, is a neurotransmitter in your brain that's commonly associated with good feelings, by and large. I mean, it's a gross oversimplification. But serotonin is primarily found in your actual gut, right? And so when we talk about having feelings of anxiety, it's frequently associated with kind of pits in our stomach, right? Feelings in our stomach. And so a serotonin unbalance in the gut can result in some of these smooth muscles kind of spasming, giving you kind of those knots and feelings in your stomach. Smooth muscles are also what are going to be affected. Well, I mean, all of them are going to be affected, but smooth muscles are also what's going to be affected when you have a sympathetic nervous system activation, right? So your fight or flight mechanism. One of the things that'll happen, in addition to increased respiration, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, is you'll frequently get kind of that nervous stomach people talk about. And at the extremes, people actually evacuate their bowels and bladders as kind of what's speculated to be kind of a weight shedding mechanism for you to be able to get out or flee in that environment. And then we also have the skeletal muscles, obviously, based off of what everybody thinks of as muscles. This is what we were talking about last time, that connect directly to the bones. And that contraction is what's allowing those bones to act like levers. Contraction of most skeletal muscles is under that conscious control. The movements produced by skeletal muscles make, obviously, that physical work that we're going to be talking about today and we were talking about last time happen. And you can have varying degrees of kind of control, right? I mean, so you think about your ability to move your arm, but you'll also notice that it's sometimes hard for you to actually physically contract that muscle without thinking about, okay, I'm going to move my leg, right? So contracting your quads without actually just trying to like think about moving your leg in that capacity. And so that's one of the things bodybuilders will talk about, of that kind of mind-muscle connection, allowing for greater contraction, etc. And Terry Crews is the most entertaining person on planet Earth. So the energy required for those muscular contractions comes in the form of a high-energy phosphate known as ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and CP, creatine phosphate. So if any of y'all have ever heard of people taking creatine as a supplement, right, this is increasing the ATP production, giving your muscles more energy to exercise. And we can think of this ATP as kind of a rechargeable battery, right? So if there wasn't a restoration process, you would have just a couple seconds of energy to use. But your body uses ATP and is replaced in a variety of ways, right? But the most common one is just the breakdown of nutrients of food, right? So eating replenishes that ATP. So when enough oxygen is available, aerobic metabolism can supply nearly all the energy needed for light or moderate muscular work. However, once we start getting into the actual, what you would conceptualize as like exercise or actual substantial physical exertion, anaerobic glycosis is going to serve as an additional source of that ATP. However, this is going to result in rapid fatigue as you get that buildup of lactic acid. Right? Anytime we have that feeling of, oh my God, my muscles are burning, that's that buildup of lactic acid. It's a byproduct of that anaerobic glycosis. So when we think about systems or machines in general, we can think about the efficiency, right? And the human muscular system is kind of similarly inefficient to what you experience with an internal combustion engine, right? So only about 20% of that conversion from chemical energy to muscular energy goes to the actual act, whereas 80% results in kind of this metabolic heat. All right, so when you think about your internal combustion engine, when you think about your car, as long as it's not an electric car, if you've been driving for a while, you put your hand on the hood and it's hot, right? That heat is inefficiency, right? It's the same idea with the human body. Any questions about the musculus, muscles, use of muscles? Yeah.
Like, is there any desirable way to make our bodies more efficient in terms of the amount of energy we use?
No, I mean, I think that is just inherent to kind of the biology, the byproduct of the consumption and the use. Trying to think if off the top of my head I could think of any creative way. But no, I mean, so because that's just a byproduct of the actual the conversion process, I don't know if there would be any safer ethical way, so to speak, of making that system more efficient. But it's a really interesting question. I mean, everything we do is trying to increase efficiency to some degree, right? I mean, Tesla just had their battery day a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about, you know, single-digit percentages increase in efficiency, right? If you're able to get that, it results in a massive savings. But all right, on to the circulatory system. Right? So when we think of our circulatory system, we have various cells and plasma. Like the red cells, red blood cells, are what are transporting the oxygen. Little inner tubes that make their way to your lungs and then transport the oxygen throughout the body. Your white blood cells are what are responsible for your immune response, right? So they're what's fighting germs, it's fighting bugs. One of the interesting things about coronavirus is it seems that one of the biggest issues leading to mortality with coronavirus isn't necessarily the virus itself, it's the body's hyperactive immune response to the virus. And so part of the treatment for people with severe coronavirus is actually putting them on a steroid, which reduces the inflammation, reduces the hyperactivity of the immune system. And then we have plasma. And plasma is what's suspending those blood cells, what's allowing that circulatory system to circulate. It contains about 90% water, and then 10% those nutrient and salt solutes. Excuse me. All right, so this is why if you've ever seen somebody get a saline solution, right, at a hospital, it's largely trying to replace deplenished plasma. And all of this in your circulatory system, if we drain you out, accounts for about 8% of your body weight. I'm always very squeamish about blood, and so it's always like gamble every time I give this lecture or whether I'm going to pass out, like thinking about it. Feel fine, don't worry. All right, so the red blood cells themselves are formed in your bone marrow. All right, and this is why, if you've ever heard of people getting bone marrow transplants, they need to do so to allow their body to begin replenishing their own blood cells. All right, because not only are those red blood cells important for delivering the oxygen, they're necessary for removing that carbon dioxide. And as I'm sure you all know at this point, carbon dioxide is just that byproduct of respiration. And so if you've ever tried to hold your breath, after a while you start getting this kind of burning feeling, like this need to breathe. It's not your body sending a signal that there's not enough oxygen, it's your body sending a signal that there's too much carbon dioxide. And so that's why you'll get some people who, so like David Blaine, if you ever watched him go through this process of setting a record holding his breath, he'll hyperventilate to deplete his body of as much carbon dioxide as possible, and thus allow that response to not kick in. And so I think it's the case in certain types of cancer like leukemia. I think people usually have to get some sort of bone marrow transplant as a function of the type of chemotherapy that they're usually given. One of my friend's son had leukemia and had to get a bone marrow transplant because of that treatment for the leukemia itself. And so when we look at the blood flow distribution, as you would expect, it differs based off of how much work you are doing. Right, so in your resting state right now, your muscles themselves are only getting about 15 to 20% of that blood flow. Scan at 5%, your digestive system is taking up about a quarter of that blood flow, right? Because in your resting state, your body says, all right, let's deal with all these kind of non-absolute essentials in that moment. Kidney, your brain, getting about 15% of blood flow. And your heart, about 4 to 5. Now, one of the things you'll notice once you move up to that moderate work is your body just essentially immediately prioritizes two things, right? The muscles, get the energy for the muscles, and your skin. Now, why would blood flow increase to the skin? Yeah?
Maybe to make your skin more rigid in case you got attacked or something.
Okay, that's a clever idea. I don't know to what degree that would be kind of a secondary process, but there's one big primary process.
Does it have to do with sweating?
Yeah, more or less, right? And so when you think about your car, right, your car has what's known as a radiator. And the attempt of the radiator is to dissipate heat as much as it can. So what does it do? It takes fluid, it flushes it through your engine, it comes back out, it increases that surface area to dissipate that heat, and then it sends it back through. And that's exactly what your body's doing, right? Your body is taking that blood that's primarily spending its time in the muscles. And again, we know one of the byproducts of any sort of muscular exertion is heat. It's taking that heat to the skin, it's displacing it, it's giving it as much surface area as possible, allowing you to dissipate that heat. Right? Because if internal temperatures get too high, we start having cell damage. That's one of the reasons why high temperatures can be so bad, especially for kids. You know, once you start looking at, 104, 105 degree temperatures internally, you start getting brain damage, right? Your cells start breaking down. And so this is your body's cooling mechanism. And you'll notice then everything else kind of reduces, right? Your digestive system, your body says, okay, well, in this moment, digesting things is not that important, right? We have to deal with whatever's coming up, right? You have to think about all of this in terms of evolution, of what is your body trying to do in the situation. If you're trying to do work, that work could be pertinent for your survival. So let's take away any of the non-absolute essential to this moment. And then you get to the heavy work. And at heavy work, your body's saying, you know what? It'd be nice to cool down, but if we're overexerting ourselves here, there's probably a reason, right? And so let's maintain as much energy in those muscles as is possible. And this is one of the reasons you can overheat so quickly at really high levels of exertion, because your body's sending as much blood as it can to the muscles and not as much to the skin to cool you down. And you can see the relative decreases of the blood flow distribution to your brain. And that's why sometimes after you finish working out, after a hard workout, you feel stupid, right? Your brain doesn't have the available resources to get in and get operating at peak performance again. Questions about this?
I have one. So
Yeah.
how, this might be a dumb question, but I guess how does your body kind of regulate how much blood is going to what area?
So, like, how is it making the distinction between, do I send it to the muscles, like directing the traffic on the highway?
Yeah, like making sure it's going to the right place.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would speculate it has something to do with the dilation and constriction of blood vessels in certain areas of your body, or of the veins and arteries, but I don't know that specifically. If anybody does have that sort of medical knowledge, it'd be really interesting to hear. But yeah, it's a really good question. If you can find that out, let me know. I'd love to hear that.
Will do.
Cool. All right. So when we're talking about the energy cost of work itself, we're measuring that energy expenditure in kcals, right, or kilocalories. Your average basal metabolic rate, so that baseline without doing anything, you're just sitting there, is about 1 kcal per kilogram body weight per hour. And then obviously, as you exercise or work, and that means physical work, not what you get paid to do work, more is going to be required from you, which is why exercise reduces your overall body weight by increasing the cost and hopefully not being met with increased consumption. All right, so about 3,500 calories excess corresponds to 1 pound of body fat. Now, your average basal metabolic rate, I mean, a lot of things are going to affect it. You know, it's not just the actual work, but, you know, if you're sitting in a room like this that's nice and toasty and you start sweating, right, your heart rate increases, as does your basal metabolic rate. As your body weight increases, so too does your basal metabolic rate, right? So it takes more energy for your body to maintain at that mass. But here are some, come on, move over. Here's some estimates of that actual energy expenditure in kcals per minute for different activities. right, you can see that sleeping is, as you would expect, very little actual effort. And then you can start to see kind of the difference between what would be thought about, you know, for just a brisk walk, right, at 6 kilometers an hour, all the way up to higher level athletic activities. Right? Now, I realize that's kind of an amorphous definition, but you can see. Zoomies, can you hear me again? Ah, yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. This isn't worth the effort to go through and unmute everything as is would be necessary to show. But come on. Sorry, Zoomies, I don't know.
We can't hear you.
We don't know what you're drawing. Nate, can you hear
Nate.
us? We're having our own little lecture now, guys. Oh, yay, Nate's coming back.
I was hoping he would check the chat, at least when he got over there. It looks like he's moved off now.
It does look like he's gone away.
Our sound must come through his like iPad or something. I have no
I
idea.
think he did that so he could get his headset to stay connected when he.
Ask us a question, something.
How long can it go on?
I don't even know if it's recorded, to be honest, then. But I guess so. I don't know. No.
Well, the second question is our conversation that we're having right now being recorded?
Yes.
Where we're talking about him not having audio.
Yeah.
That's relevant.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay!
All right. So, what was the last thing y'all heard me say?
I think we missed this chart and the previous one.
Missed this one and the previous one. All right. So you didn't get this one, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we'll start from the beginning. You guys get to hear the whole spiel once again. So we have a resting rate of consumption for both energy and oxygen at the onset of physical activity here. There is this latency period for an increase in our energy production and the oxygen uptake from what our body needs, right? And so that's what's leading to this. This looks like some sort of beautiful mind scribbling here that isn't making much sense. Not to call myself a beautiful mind, just scrambling all over the place. So you have this deficit in here that your body eventually is going to have to make up, right? But then you reach this kind of steady state where in the production of energy and the uptake of oxygen is now matched to the demands of your body. And then after you cease that activity, you have this oxygen essentially debt, right? So your body has a debt that it has to repay, and that's why you have this latency period from when you stop exercising until you're back to normal. All right. And so the measurement of this workload can be done with oxygen consumption, right? So how much oxygen are you taking in at any given time? Heart rate, but obviously heart rate's not going to be as reliable as something like oxygen consumption would be, because there's a variety of things that can increase your heart rate. Everything from attraction, physical sexual attraction, to being scared, etc. Blood pressure and ventilation. So obviously any sort of measurement of blood pressure is going to be pretty intrusive. It's going to be hard for people to maintain performance on their job if they have a blood pressure cuff on. And then subjective measurements. So it's asking people how much do they feel like they're exerting themselves. And so in the F-35 case we talked about on Tuesday, apparently they had been collecting repeated self-reports of how much did the pilots feel like they were exerting themselves. And my understanding is that the pilot that crashed typically was giving responses of 4s. On the day he actually crashed, he gave a 6. Now, you could ask all sorts of questions about why that would be. Maybe he's looking for some post facto explanation for why he crashed. Maybe the actual act of going through all of those crash procedures increased his perception of physical workload, etc. But they can be better than nothing. But if you're going to rely on subjective measurements, it's best to use them as a relative measurement rather than an absolute. So are you higher or lower than you were yesterday, rather than being at an absolute out of 10. One thing you'll find with a lot of experts, things like pilots, is they've got a little bit of an ego to them, and then everyone will admit that they're being overworked, right? And so, you know, a pilot 7 is really like a 10. So we can look at this sort of capacity and fatigue in both short-term and long-term time scales. And so short-term is that aerobic capacity, right? Frequently referred to as VO2 max. So if you've ever done a VO2 max test, what they're essentially measuring is what is the maximum amount, the maximum volume of oxygen you can consume over a time period. Right? And that limit is reached when the heart can't beat any faster. The cardio system can't supply oxygen at a faster rate. That's your max. All right, and the kind of general rule of thumb as to how many beats per minute you can get up to is about 210 minus your age. All right, so at 30, my max heart rate should be about 180. Long term, that physical work capacity drops sharply as the duration of work increases. Right? I mean, you could think about this even just in terms of lifting weights. For every subsequent hour you're lifting weights, your actual output is substantially diminished. Right? Such that at the end of a physically taxing day, your actual work output or capacity as a percentage or proportion of your actual max is substantially diminished. So workers are going to have this physiological feeling of fatigue, experiencing 30 to 40% of that maximum capacity for an 8-hour shift. Right? So if you have a maximum theoretical output of X, maintenance of 0.3X for 8 hours is going to result in the feeling of whole body fatigue. And when we talk about whole body fatigue, we don't just mean you feel like you got to work out. I'm sure everybody at some point has had this sensation of whole body fatigue. Or it almost feels like you're sick, right? You're overly tired, a sense of weariness, feeling of complete physical and emotional exhaustion, impaired muscle performance, right? You just can't get your body to do what you need it to do. Difficulty staying awake. And even at the extremes, there are risks of things like heart attacks. And there's literally a phenomena, especially in Japan, of people working themselves to death, right? Maintaining an output for so long that their body literally shuts down. There's a Japanese word for it, and I don't remember what it is. Right? But you have all of these people who at age like 30 are dying of heart attacks. The body just shuts down from continued and exhaustive use.
Question about the Japan example.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question about the Japan example.
Yeah. What's up?
So I know. I'm taking another class called Work Design, and what we kind of focus in that class is about the Toyota production system, which was founded back in the 60s. It's basically a way to approach, work environment to, maximize, work efficiency, but at the same time provide workers, enough rest or whatever, so they don't experience what's said in this article. And from my understanding, I thought it seemed like since the 60s, that way of thinking was implemented, across the entire country, from the government down to the private sector. So I guess my question is, and I guess you probably would have gotten into it, is with that system in place, I would think that something like this won't be happening in Japan, but would probably be happening here in the United States, where we do kind of emphasize overworking and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, so you raised a really interesting question. I don't know if y'all could hear in class here, but his main point was, there are certain government regulations that try to protect against this, right? And it is true that in the U.S., we typically work longer hours than most any other country, with fewer days off, things like that. But what we're talking about here is a country in Japan that has kind of a hyper prioritized perception of work ethic, right? Such that they're working nonstop for long periods. And you are absolutely right that in the US we have various worker protections, right? And so OSHA, for example, is a governmental attempt to maintain safe workplaces. And part of that, I think, is mandatory breaks for workers at different points. The unionization effort in the US also led to kind of protections of workers in that regard, right? Having mandatory breaks every hour or every couple hours. And so I think it's largely a cultural difference, right? Between Japan and perhaps the rest of the world. I suspect you could find examples of this anywhere in the world, right? It's nothing about the Japanese that makes them more susceptible to this. I think it's just largely the work ethic in Japan that seems to be driving this, that has led to kind of a natural crisis. All right, one of the biggest things that struck me, I watched a documentary a while ago, and it was about kind of this Japanese work ethic. I don't remember what the documentary was, but they were talking about how a lot of these Japanese businessmen don't really even have homes, right? They'll go and rent what is literally just almost like a coffin, right? They'll have buildings filled with what is just a bed, right? And so you rent it, you go to work, when you come home, you just crawl into bed and that's it, and then you go back out, right? There's any of the socializing is happening out of the bars and stuff like that, but they are so engrossed in this idea of a constant work ethic that it results in this. But truth be told, I'm not all that familiar with those cultural differences. And so if you can find, I'm sure there are some good studies about that and this prevalence across different cultures. I'd be really interested to see that if you can find that. All right, so how can we reduce that fatigue, right? One way, as I've talked about multiple times in class, is engineering solutions to reduce that physical work required, right? Reduce the amount of effort required by the worker. So including things like conveyor belts, automated material handling, things like what Amazon has done now that their workers don't have to run around the warehouse. Things are literally brought to them. Now that's also an efficiency solution, but does reduce the physical work required. However, when you can't redesign a job with engineered solutions, you can determine a work-rest schedule given the following formula, which is going to yield essentially a proportion of the workday that should be granted as rest. All right, and here we're looking at the physical work capacity minus the energy expenditure rate required to perform that job over the resting and minus that energy for the job as well. So it's going to yield, again, that proportion of rest required. So if following that equation, we get a result of 0.3, that suggests that over an 8-hour day, a worker should be granted 2.5 hours, roughly about 2.5 hours of physical rest to be distributed over the course of the day. However, it's important to note that that physical work capacity here is going to differ as a function of age, gender, etc., right? So it's not the case that any individual job is going to result in a constant rest period fraction, but rather for every individual, their physical capacity, physical capability will dictate that. Right? A 20-year-old is going to have a much higher PWC than would somebody in their 60s or 70s. Running out of time, so I'm going to go over this a little bit quicker. So at temperature, that also increases essentially the amount of effort, the amount of work, such that the hotter it is, the more rest is needed. which may help explain why it never seems like construction workers on the highways are actually ever working and just standing around looking at each other. So muscle endurance drops sharply once we get above 15% of that maximum voluntary contraction. And within seconds, above 40% of that contraction, right? So this is why, if you've ever done squats at the gym, after you're done doing those squats, you have so fatigued your quads that it becomes hard to actually stabilize your legs, right? They become so overly fatigued, they no longer function as well. And then so, I mean, anybody who's worked out has had the experience of the pain and discomfort, that reduced coordination, and increased muscle tremors. Right, my favorite thing is after I do jujitsu, trying to hold my hand out, and it's shaking like I'm going crazy here. I've had too much caffeine. All right, so I forgot to do this the last couple class periods. But what were today's main takeaways?
I guess you could say that our bodies are just like cars.
Our bodies are like cars. Yes.
Basically, they, you know, we have inefficiencies that, of course, you know, through exercise and other, you know, proper diets we could limit, and you know, just like cars, we you know, our blood circulation helps, I guess, give off heat that shouldn't stay in our bodies. So yeah, basically any way you look at it, whether it's the muscles, the circulatory system, we're just like cars. So.
Yes, exactly. And we have a source of energy required. And you can get into the whole dietitian arguments about kind of the fuel, quote unquote, that you put in your body and make it even more like cars. Yeah. What else?
My big takeaway is that there seems to be enough information that we know about, or ways to measure the capacity of human, you know, musculature, the circulatory system, pulmonary system, that we could design things effectively so that we're not overly stressing out the body.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you could, in theory, go into a lot of these workplaces and redesign much about how they do things. It's just convincing the employers that that's worthwhile, right? What else? Yeah, Andrew.
We might have the impression that we can just work as hard as we want to, but our body has pretty strong things pushing against the idea that we can just continue on and on and on.
Yeah, there is a very real limit, right? Now, one of my favorite, I guess you could call them personalities, is a man by the name of David Goggins, who is a former Navy SEAL who has this whole speech that apparently he learned in SEAL school. I think he calls it like the 40% rule, that when you think you've reached your maximum, you've only reached 40% and you've got another 60% in you. Now, to a certain degree, that's true, right, with the whole willpower and physical exercise, but you do have a very real limit. Now, you putting in a long week at work is not going to make you susceptible to a heart attack. You don't have to worry about that, but there are very real physical limits to what your body can do, both in muscle output, in the available energy, fatigue, etc. So, yeah, good. One other thing. What was another main takeaway from today?
I don't have anything super specific, but I always think it's amazing, kind of like what Dennis and they were talking about, you know, is it that we're like cars or cars like us? And then at the same time, you know, we're all doing our best to figure this out. So I think there's a beauty in that we're always going to continuously make things better and different to accommodate. And it's just amazing how we have our physical body that also sort of changes with that too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, the human body is an amazing, I don't even know what you would call it, machine of sorts, in that, so much of our evolution has been geared towards things like the dissipation of heat, right? What are the consequences of that? Okay, well, we have to take away blood flow to the brain, so cognition's going to suffer, as is digestion, but we've realized that this is more important in that moment, right? And so we've now established a circulatory system that is able to redirect blood as necessary to adapt to a situation. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole, philosophy in design about kind of biology-inspired design of what are the things we can take from not only the human body, but other creatures to try and design products or engineer solutions. So, all right. So you're about a month away from your presentations, right? And so for those of y'all working on the consulting projects, let me know if you have any questions. For those of y'all who are in the disasters paper, let me know if you have any questions about that. Don't wait until the last minute. I will happily answer questions to the last minute, but if you're emailing me the day of asking me about a potential paper topic, I'm going to know you didn't put in that much time or effort. So next time we're going to have an exam review. We'll go ahead and just do that all online, so there'll be no in-person contingent. So for those of y'all who normally come on Tuesdays, we will just do that online. The next exam will be online as well. If you have any questions about that or anything else, let me know. Otherwise, have a good weekend. See y'all next week.
I do have a question about the essay. And honestly, I should have asked this earlier, but I wasn't able to find it. But is there a max and min amount of paper, or max and min amount of pages that our essay needs or requires?
Yeah. So you're an undergrad, is that right? You're taking this at 400 level? Okay.
Yes.
I don't remember what it is. I think it says in the syllabus, I think it's like 8 or 10 pages.
I think it's 8.
8 pages?
I looked and I couldn't find it. Let me
Okay.
look again.
Okay. If you don't see it, let me know, because if I haven't put it down, I need to put it down somewhere. But I think Casey said she thought it was 8. So whatever I said on the first class day, you can hold me to. So, but I will try to put that down and then you submit to location.